Lynn Palermo here from the Family History Writing Studio, and welcome to this week's video lesson of storylines. Today I want to talk to you about structuring our nonfiction stories. So when we begin to plot or outline our stories, we need to decide on how we want to structure the story. And plotting is essentially structuring the story, but in nonfiction, they like to use the word structure as opposed to plotting. I use them interchangeably because sometimes people understand more what plotting or outlining is. But if you see structuring used, it's basically the same idea. There's no right way to structure your story, but there are really three popular ways that we can look to structure our stories. So I want to give you those three ways today. The first way is chronological. So it's pretty straightforward. We all know what chronological means. So we're going to arrange our narrative in a chronological order. So we're going to follow the story. And I don't mean the chronological life of your ancestor, but the story. That's different from the life of your ancestor. What is our story? And so we're going to arrange it in chronological order, probably into chapters. And this is what typically works for most nonfiction stories. You're still going to use your characterization, your descriptions and details and dialogue, all that great stuff that we use to make our stories really interesting. But we're going to put it in chronological order. Now, the go-to book that most people recommend is In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. So he goes through, he uses a chronological order to go through this murder. So that would be a good reference for you if you want to take a look at how one of the masters does it. Our second one is parallel narrative. Now with parallel narrative, we're actually telling two stories. So you're going to have a chapter, and that chapter would be the story of one particular ancestor. So perhaps you have a couple that you want to tell the story of. So that would be one particular of that, maybe it's the male. And then the next chapter may be the female. So we're going to tell two parallel stories at the same time, and they're going to maybe flip back chapter to chapter. And then at some point, those two stories will merge. And we call that a parallel structure. Again, we still use all that great stuff of characterization and details and descriptions and dialogues to make our stories wonderful. A great story to read that follows this is I've got two examples for you. Actually, Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. That's a great example. He actually he's looking at the World's Fair coming to Chicago, while at the same time he is telling the story of a H.H. Holmes serial murderer. So they are two separate things happening, and then they converge at a certain point. There's also another one I want to tell you about, which is The Color of Water by James McBride. And this one might be a little bit better reference for those of us who are writing family history. He tells the story of his mother's childhood, but at the same time, he also tells the story of his own childhood growing up with his mother. And then again, they dovetail at a certain point. So that might be a really great example. So that's The Color of Water by James McBride. The last one is called the immersion model. And the immersion model is when the writer themselves are immersed in the story. So we use this when a writer, or a lot of times a journalist, wants to tell the story of a particular person or group of people, and so they immerse themselves in whatever these people do. So an example of this is House by Tracy Kidder. And she actually joins a building crew to help build a house. So she tells their story of building a house by joining this crew. So she's not telling her story, she's telling their story. I can see how we could apply this as genealogists. We immerse ourselves in the genealogy world, but we're going to tell the story of our ancestors. So I think we could apply the immersion model in that respect. So again, we want to use our personal experience within that arena to tell the stories of these people. So there we have it. Those are the three most popular structures that you might want to look at for structuring or outlining your story. You want to either do a chronological narrative, a parallel narrative, or an immersion narrative. Now, I'll put links to all of these books that I've mentioned in the notes below this video. So thank you for joining me. If you are not a member of Storylines, make sure you go over to the familyhistorywritingstudio.com, or if you're here, make sure you sign up. I'll put a sign up below, and that way you're going to get these video lessons in your inbox every week. And I'll see you next week for Storylines.